Hi, Paul Sarkis, Good News Planet. I'm speaking to Bryan Wilson. Hi, Bryan. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Glad to be here.
All righty. I'm glad you're here as well because I have a wonderful book in front of me here and looked it through. And John E. Fetzer, F-E-T-Z-E-R, and the Quest for the New Age, okay? Radio pioneer, media mogul, and Detroit Tigers owner, John was, and fostered the marriage of science and spirituality through the decades. That's an interesting thought. How did he go about to do that?
Well, John Fetzer, he was a very successful businessman, and he earned millions in the radio business. And he was also the longtime owner of the Detroit Tigers for almost 30 years. But one of the things that people don't know about him is that he was also on a kind of lifelong spiritual quest. And it started really with his early experiments with radio. He was fascinated by this idea that these invisible radio waves were flying through the air and that people could pick them up and communicate. And he became convinced that radio waves were just part of a much larger kind of spectrum that shaded off into more subtle energies, maybe even the spirit itself. So he was very interested in creating or at least sponsoring a spiritualized science that would find the connections between the materialist science and spirit.
How do you go about that?
Well, in his later life, he decided to begin liquidating his businesses and pouring money into what was then the Fetzer Foundation. And this was the foundation was created in the 1950s, but it really got off the ground in the 1970s. And he began because he was fascinated with parapsychological research. So he's very interested in funding research on clairvoyance and PK, psychokinesis, distant viewing, those kinds of things. So he basically made grants to a number of research institutions around the country, including J.B. Ryan's Research Institute, to basically do research on parapsychology because he thought that was probably the best way of kind of proving the reality of spirit using science.
Did any of these research centers come up with something that we might all know about?
Well, one of the most famous was the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab that used psychics to basically see if they could influence random number generators. And one of the things they found is that, yes, in certain circumstances, they seem to be able to do that. The problem with psychic effects, they found, is that they tend to be rather unreliable and it's difficult to reproduce the data. So for John Fetzer, into the 1980s, he began to change his focus, and he became very interested in energy medicine and alternative healing. So in the 80s, the foundation basically turned its research focus away from parapsychology and into alternative medicine of a variety of different kinds.
That's a good thing and quite prevalent out there right now. Where did they go with that? Do we have some thoughts on how they've helped us humankind in that process?
Yeah, John Fetzer was an early supporter of biofeedback. All the way back to the 1960s. He had a brother-in-law, a man named Van Yeager, who was working at the Porter Langley Research Institute at the University of California at San Francisco. And through him, John Fetzer came to know a man named Jim Hart. And Jim Hart was doing kind of the cutting-edge biofeedback research. And so it was one of the earliest kind of popularizers of the physical and emotional effects that biofeedback can have. And of course, today biofeedback is still a major kind of part of the alternative medical scene.
So now, Bryan, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Well, after Fetzer's death, he died in 1991. the Fetzer Foundation, which changed its name to the Fetzer Institute, began funding kind of large-scale studies through the National Institutes of Health and other organizations like that, looking at things like the effect of prayer and meditation on physical and mental health. And another thing they did was they funded a TV program and book by Bill Moyers about healing with the mind. And this was one of the first exposures that a lot of Americans got to these alternative health kinds of modalities.
Wow. Okay. I'm a Channel 13 former employee, so I actually worked on the Brain series for a few years in my life, and also made a couple of shows with Bill Moyers. And thank you, Mr. Fetzer. I guess I don't recollect. It was back in the 80s that I did that. Well, let me ask you about yourself, though, Bryan. And the quest for the New Age. Are you on the quest for the New Age as well? Because you're a professor of American religious history in the Department of Comparative Religion at Western Michigan University, and author of some additional books, John Henry Kellogg. I guess that's from the famous Kellogg family. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, the inventor of cornflakes.
And the religion of biologic living, and Yankees in Michigan. Okay, that's not the New York Yankees, is it?
No, those are New Englanders who settled in Michigan in the 19th century.
What fascinated you about John that made you write a whole book and spend, I'm sure, a bunch of time researching it?
Yeah, I had a wonderful time researching it. I'm very interested in new religious movements, and I'm very interested in new religious movements in the Midwest. Primarily, well, one of the reasons is why California gets all the limelight when it comes to new religions. But it turns out that the Midwest is also very fertile ground for all sorts of interesting new religious movements. And the other thing, as an academic, I'm very interested in how individuals construct their worldviews. And that was my interest in John Harvey Kellogg, not so much the cornflakes, but he was a Seventh-day Adventist who left the tradition and created a very interesting kind of religion of his own that he called biologic living. And with John Fetzer, the fascinating thing is he was on this lifelong spiritual quest beginning in the 1930s, and really well documented the various steps he took and the reading he did in order to reach what I think is a kind of proto-New Age position, a proto-New Age worldview, even before people started talking about the New Age.
Wow. I'm also, when I saw who you were and who John was and so on and so on, I'm interfaith minister, spiritual, all religions, no religion, whatever you want to believe, keep your hands off of each other, and type of person. So I'm fascinated as well with the spirituality and our human existence. Obviously, you are too. When did you get the bite, I'm going to call it, that religion was something of really more than just a passing, spending time, I don't know if you went to church or whatever. What was it that really interested you enough to actually, now be a professor in it?
Well, because I was not only raised a Presbyterian, but my family, they weren't a family of churchgoers. But what really got me interested in religion was I took 3 years in the Peace Corps and did a couple of years in Honduras and a year in the Dominican Republic, and was exposed to a whole different kind of culture. And, of course, that culture is based in Honduras on a kind of mixture of Roman Catholicism and ancient Mayan beliefs. So that got me fascinated. And then in the Dominican Republic, it was also a Catholic country, and I got very interested in Roman Catholicism. But I was in a place that had a lot of Haitians, so there were people actually practicing voodoo as well. And so after that experience, I decided to come back. I was originally going to go to med school and become a doctor, but I kind of reoriented everything and decided to devote my life to the study of religion cross-culturally.
Okay, let me ask you 2 last questions. Thank you very much for taking some time and sharing yourself and Johnny Fetzer with us, The Quest of the New Age. Congratulations on your book. 2 last questions are, First one is we're involved with the International Day of Peace, September 21st, the United Nations declared day. And we've asked many people, what does peace mean to them? So if you would be kind enough to share, mention your name first, and then say, what does peace mean to you?
Bryan C. Wilson. Peace means a world that accepts people, that is tolerant of other beliefs and curious about other people. And I think if we know our neighbors, we're more likely to create a peaceful world.
Beautifully stated. Last question. We're also involved with the subject of love, L-O-V-E. Yes. If you could also say your name and what does love mean to Bryan Wilson? Thank you.
Bryan C. Wilson. Well, love, according to Johnny Fetzer, was kind of the cosmic energy that holds the world together. I'm not sure whether it's a cosmic energy or a human energy, but it definitely is the thing that holds the world together.
All right, beautiful. Thanks for sharing the good news with us today, Bryan. Very enjoyable conversation, and I look forward to meeting you one day.
My pleasure. I look forward to meeting you too.
Okay. Best of luck with the book. It's going to be a big success because it's a very interesting, well-written book. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.